Hello, everyone. Before we started, let's wait just a minute or two. All right, I think it's time. So hello, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar. My name is Mei-Ling, and I will be your host for today's session. Thank you so much for taking time to join us. Before we get started, I would like to introduce two of our speakers today. They are all coming from Alex Zwiers, which is part of a Product Life Group. And I would like to leave the floor to you, Tom.
Yes, thanks, Mei-Ling. Well, good afternoon to you. We are, Eline Derven and myself, are going to present to you the drug device combination products in the EU and also Article 117 and the notified body, which is important to us. I think our presentation will last approximately 45 to 50 minutes. And after that, we're going to have a Q&A. And you can post your questions in the chat. And please do so immediately. So don't hesitate to wait until the end of the presentation. Just post them so we have a pretty good overview on what's going to come to us. Well, I'm going to go to the first slide. And I'm just wondering, yes, here it is. So personal introductions, of course, very important that you know who is talking. Aline, perhaps you can start by presenting yourself to the audience.
Yes, of course, no problem, Tom. I started, first of all, with a study biomedical sciences, bachelor and master, and I did an additional track and specialization in the immune system. I didn't proceed my career further in research, but I went straight to regulatory affairs. First of all, at a legal manufacturer, whereby I was maintaining medical devices on the market. I was performing registrations, mainly outside the European Union, as well as that I was well involved in new design and development projects for the European Union market. Shortly, I joined a legal manufacturer for an active pharmaceutical ingredient manufacturer, whereby I expanded my knowledge mainly for production, as well as that I performed registrations in China. However, I was missing the medical devices way too much. So therefore, I ended up, but then as a consultant, which I'm now doing already for almost 5 years. And I choose specifically for these agencies because Zwiers is specialized especially to support development projects. So that's really nice, which is not limited to just devices, but as you can see, also to drug device combination products, which is the topic of today, of course. And then I'm focusing more on the device part with my team. And as you can probably already guess, then there are some very helpful medicinal product colleagues which know everything about the drug. And one of those colleagues is actually Tom. So I give you the word back, Tom.
Thank you, Aline. Indeed, my name is Tom Andersen. I'm the COO of Zwiers Consultancy. And as Aline said, I'm more focused on the pharmaceutical side of things. I'm a pharmacist by training. I'm working in mainly the pharmaceutical industry for more than 30 years, mainly in regulatory affairs and also in development. And in that, I've also worked on medical device combinations, and I'm working here for years also as a consultant. And in that respect, I've worked closely together with Eileen on a few drug device combinations. Hence, that we are going to present this to you and also share our experiences and knowledge on these drug device combinations under the MDR Article 117. Let's go to the next slide. Well, the scope of today will be on integral drug device combinations as medicinal product. Why I'm telling you that so explicitly? Because there are different kinds of drug device combinations possible, where the device part can be leading and that the medicinal product is just an ancillary. No, we are going to focus on integral drug device combinations as medicinal product. What is important is that since May 26th, 2021, Article 117 of the Medical Device Regulation applies. That means that if you're going to put a drug device combination product on the market as a medicinal product, you have to have your device part evaluated by a notified body. And that can be of means of a CE mark, and that can be of means by notified body opinion. And this evaluation should be part of your medicinal product marketing authorization application. So therefore, it's really important that we address the device part because it's new. We go to the next slide. We have here a number of, let's say, examples of integral drug device combinations because a lot of people ask us, what is it? Does this also falls into the scope or not? So we will not give you an exhaustive list here, but just a few examples. So for instance, a pre-filled inhaler with salbutamol is an integral drug device combination, which should be registered as medicinal product. And the same applies to an insulin autoinjector. We have a range of pre-filled syringes with biologicals, with ER drugs, etc., with or without needle. And then we have also antiviral loaded interventional rings. These are just a few examples of integral drug device combinations. Well, after definition, it brings us to the agenda of today. First, Eileen is going to speak about Article 117 and how to get to a notified body. What's important there? She's also going to speak on what you then actually need to submit or to provide to a notified body to make this evaluation. She's also going to speak in what does it mean for your marketing authorization application? What should be implemented extra? Thereafter, I will take over and speak a little bit more about the notified body process, how long it takes, and also to how to align it with your marketing authorization application. And last but not least, we have a few take-home messages for you. Well, Eileen, I'm going to give you the floor. And of course, please let me know because I'm handling the slides. So, and Eileen is sitting somewhere completely else, different. Let me know, Eileen, if you would like to go to the next.
Thank you very much, Thomas, for the introduction. And we already heard a little bit about Article 117, but let's look a little bit more in detail. So we start with this integral drug device combination product. So this does not mean any co-packs with medical devices or reference devices. So that's all out of scope. And then the first question, you need to ask whether the main mechanism of action is coming from the device or from the drug. If it's coming from the device, then the medical device regulation is leading and CE marking should be obtained. For now, we just leave it as such, although the process is, of course, a little bit more complicated. However, it's not in scope of today's webinar. So therefore, we are going to focus on that effect that the main mechanism of action is coming from the drug. So it's actually by pharmacological, immunological, or by metabolic means. And then leading is the medicinal product directive. However, additionally, you still need to do something for the device. And the first question you need to ask yourself is, what is the risk class of the device? Because then you also know whether a notified body is needed or whether some self-certification process could perhaps be followed. So in case it's a class 1 device and the device is already CE marked and is intended as such, then you can include just a declaration of conformity, which is already available by that legal manufacturer which assigned that CE marking in the CTD. And in case there's no CE mark, or perhaps it has been used differently, then you need to include the general safety and performance requirements checklist in your CTD. But there's no involvement of any notified body. In case the classification is higher as a class 1, which includes that it's in sterile condition with a measuring function or as a reusable surgical. However, probably that last one will not be fitting with an integral drug device combination product. But if that's the case, then there is notified body involvement needed. That it could be that that has been done already, and that means that it should already contain a CE marking. But then you should also keep in mind that you have to intend it as how it's meant. So don't deviate from that. And if that is the case, then you can just include the already available CE certification and the declaration of conformity into the CTD, which you can ask from the legal manufacturer which assigned that CE marking. In case it's used differently or there's no CE marking, then you need to apply for a notified body opinion, and thereby you need to send the dossier to the notified body to receive that opinion, and ultimately you can include it then in the CTD. This sounds very simple, and we're going to find out in this webinar if this is indeed as simple as presented over here. Further, it's good to realize that this Article 117 process is really a shortened process in comparison to the CE marking. So therefore, it may definitely be an advantage to follow that regulatory pathway. And then if we go to the next slide, then there are some conditions which should be kept into mind, and also that will let you know if indeed you could follow this Article 117. So it's not only that you need to look at whether the action of the medicinal substance is principal, but it's also good to realize that it's really about a single integral product. So this means that it is intended exclusively for use in the given combination, and that it's not reusable and or refillable. If those conditions are met, then Article 117 can be done. If those conditions are not met, then you need to do CE marking, which is a longer route. So in case it has been met, then you need to the conformity of the device with the relevant general safety and performance requirements, which are set out into Annex 1. However, before we go into detail about these general safety and performance requirements, we had that first question: what's the classification of the device? Because then we know whether there is notified body involvement needed. So to classify your device, you first of all need to list the specific medical purpose or the intended use of your device. In combination, that you need to determine the duration of use as well. Then you see different categories as non-invasive devices, invasive devices, active devices, and special rules. It might be that multiple rules, so also multiple categories even, are applicable to your device. And then you should pick as leading the rule which results in the highest classification. It might also be the case that it will result in just the same classification. And then you pick as leading rule, because still you pick a leading rule, but then that reflects your specific medical purpose in the best possible way. Usually you would go one by one through all those rules to see whether it's applicable or not applicable for your product. However, that's way too time consuming to do that during this webinar. So therefore, we have chosen to just give one example for each of the categories. So if we go to the non-invasive devices, we see that pre-filled syringes, which doesn't have any needle attached to it, could fall under Rule 2. So those are intended for channeling or storing this medicinal product for the purpose of eventual infusion, administration, or introduction into the body. And those can be classified as class 1 devices, unless they are connected to an active device, which might, for instance, be a transfusion pump. Then it might result in a class 2A device. It's also good to realize that in case it might be just a class 1 device because you connect it to a needle or maybe to a more gravity-based transfusion set, for instance, then you need to further subdivide it. So you still need to determine whether there is a measuring function and or whether it's in sterile condition. So that's also, if Tom press one more time, it will also be visible on the slide. But we can directly go to one of the examples of the invasive devices, I think. So here, typically, you can see that the pre-filled syringes, but done with a needle, would fall under Rule 6. Because those are surgical invasive, and usually they are for transient use because it will not take more than 60 minutes to inject the medicinal products, probably even more 60 seconds or so. And then it will result in a class 2A. If we go to an example of the active devices, then we see that jet injectors would fall under this Rule 12. So those are active devices which are intended to administer the medicinal product to the body. And usually they are classified as a class 2A. Then when we go to the special rules, we see that the inhalers would fall under Rule 20. So these are invasive devices intended to administer medicinal product by inhalation, and typically they are classified as a class 2A. There is still a condition that it might be a class 2B, as you can see. So what we can conclude from this site, that quite often a notified body is needed. So how to choose then a notified body? So you go to the NENDO website and you select there the relevant legislation, and also additionally you select the applicable MDR codes, which are further explained in the guidance. So from these MDR codes, you should at least pick the applicable MDA for active or MDN for non-active code, which reflect the design and intended purpose of the device. I've listed a few examples of these MDA or MDN code, which might be applicable. Still, I didn't include the full list because it's quite a long list, so you may want to look at the guidance. Possibly, you can also add a more horizontal code, so an MDS code that reflects specific characteristics of the device. And then you can see which notified body you can choose from, and you can select one and arrange a contract with that specific notified body. So then we have arranged our notified body. And then the next question is, what do I need to submit then to the notified body? Well, that's what we're gonna find out now. So as said, we would start from these general safety and performance requirements. And we determine for each of the requirements whether it's applicable or not applicable. And in case it's not applicable, we need to provide a short explanation for it. In case it is applicable, we need to list one or multiple methods which are used to demonstrate then that conformity with that specific applicable requirement. For that, we commonly use the harmonized standards or the common specifications. So the good thing about harmonized standard is that they have a set annex included. And in that set annex, you can see which general safety and performance requirements, if applicable, of course, for your product, could be covered by that standard. It also gives you an explanation in case it's fully covered or just partial. So that's the reason why probably every medical device expert would say, please use harmonized standards because it will make your job easier. However, it is still allowed to use some other standards as well, and also, of course, to use some common method in pharmaceutical industry. So we have been successful, usually for the sterilization method, that we can just apply the method of the pharmaceutical industry, and that we can use that as the method instead of switching to the harmonized standard for sterilization in medical device industry. We also have been successful in, if it's just a relatively easy skill bar, that you also can just use the common method in the pharmaceutical industry to demonstrate the accuracy of that skill bar. So that's good to realize too, that maybe you don't need to switch everything towards other unfamiliar standards as well. Then let's have a closer look to those general safety and performance requirements, because those are divided into 3 chapters. So chapter 1 contains all the general requirements. Mainly, they are saying that the device shall be safe and effective during the lifetime, as well as that there are a lot of requirements linked to the risk management. And I'm not sure, but maybe you heard it already. In the medical device industry, we apply that risk-based approach. And that's what you see coming back also when you're looking at the general safety and performance requirements. Then when we go to chapter 2, which are the requirements regarding design and manufacture, we see quite some categories to pick from. So it might not be the case that they are all applicable for your type of device, but it's good to walk through because you see some specific requirements, for instance, for a measuring function, or in case you have an active device, there are some specific requirements for that as well, but also in case your product will be used by lay persons, and you need to take them all into account. Then when we look at chapter 3, we see the requirements regarding the information supplied with the device. So these are usually your labels of all packaging layers and the instructions for use. However, these, we don't need to follow them up because it's good to know that we can just follow the labeling requirements of the medicinal products as outlined in the QRD. And probably you're all already familiar with it. So then we have done at least the assessment. Okay, we know now which requirements are applicable, also listed the applicable and relevant methods. However, then of course, we still need to have the evidence indeed that those methods are followed up. And that might be specific for your product. But still we see that we follow in general still quite the general requirements for technical documentation, which are outlined in Annex 2 of the MDR. So we here have the device description and specification. This is just to ensure that we are all talking about the same product. That's good. Then I still listed information to be supplied by the manufacturer, although we said we don't need to include it because we can just follow the medicinal product regulation. But in this case, it's also good to realize that there still might be some specifics coming from the device in order to use it correctly, for instance. You may need to include an instruction, but it can also be, if we think a little bit back when we had that rule 2, so we have that pre-filled syringe and we don't have any needle attached to it, and we want to follow the class 1, then it should not be connected to an active device. So in that situation, you either have to make it very clear to what it should be connected, or maybe you need to include a warning so your end user is also well aware about it. Still, it's important as well that you at least need to submit some draft labeling within your notified body submission as well. So it's not necessarily that it's that it's fully final, but at least some draft labeling whereby the device aspects are already covered. That's what the notified body still wants to see. Because you can also imagine that the mentioned and included storage condition, they should also be checked for the device, of course, if you can meet them as well, and if the device will still be functional. Then we see design and manufacturing information. So this is usually all in close relation to the risk management, what you specifically need to include. But for instance, for the manufacturing information, you still need to think about some high-level manufacturing processes whereby you're focusing on the device components. You also list, if you make use of subcontractors of suppliers, you will include that. There might still be some intermediate or release checks, and of course your manufacturing process validation should also be available and included in the technical documentation. Then we already discussed quite extensively the general safety and performance requirements, so we can continue to the benefit, risk analysis, and the risk management. So for the risk management documentation, probably you are all well familiar when you're following the ICH guideline Q9 on quality risk management, and that can also still be used for your medical device technical documentation. However, this covers the production process for sure. It might also cover the transport and storage and distribution, but it does certainly not cover all applicable life cycle phases as design and use. So for those remaining life cycle phases, you still need to create some risk management documentation, and thereby it's strongly advised to follow the more commonly method within the medical device industry, which is the ISO 14971. Then we see product verification and validation. So this consists of clinical data and preclinical data, and together it confirms the safety and the performance of your device. And I say specifically device because we are limiting to the device. The medicinal product part will still be reviewed during your medicinal product submission. So for the preclinical data, it's important to realize that this is way more than just adding animal testing data. So this can also include some more technical tests. So if you think about the syringe, there are some technical tests because there is a certain gliding force, there's a certain force needed from your user. And you also want to make sure that your user is able to push that plunger rod and thereby to administer the medicinal product, for instance. So you want to test that. Another example might be if you have an active device, that you have to include also some electrical safety testing. Additionally, it can be that you need to perform some usability studies as well. And that can also be all part of the preclinical data. Then for the clinical data, it depends on your device whether it's really needed. We have had examples that it's not needed to include any clinical data in the notified body submission, because the device is already well known, and there is quite a lot of preclinical data available, which totally confirms the safety and performance of the device already. That does not mean, of course, that there is no clinical data at all of the final product, because it may still be required for your medicinal product submission. So I'm just talking about the device technical documentation, whereby it might not be necessary. Further, you see that I also listed additional data for specific cases, because Annex 2 is doing that as well. So therefore, I took it over. But this is, for instance, that you don't need to forget about your sterilization validation data, or the accuracy data for the measuring function. That all needs to be included as well. So once you've done your exercise, so you've filled in your GSPR checklist, you have also all your evidence ready, then you can compile your technical documentation. You can prepare also a cover letter, which will ease the completeness verification for the notified body. And if certain parts or subparts are not applicable, then please just provide a short explanation. We don't have something which is called the CTD, but still the documents should be in general searchable and with bookmarks. So that's important to be kept into mind when you're preparing your documents. Additionally, there might be some specific notified body requirements, but then it's a little bit dependent from which notified body you have chosen. So we're not gonna go into detail about that part. You just need to check that and keep that in mind at the end. So then we know what to submit towards the notified body, but then it's also good to be aware, okay, do I need to submit anything then from the device in the marketing authorization application? Or was it just that simple that I needed just to include that notified body opinion, as we saw in one of the first slides? Well, first of all, it's good probably that you start to think about, okay, is there any relation between the device technical documentation and the medicinal product CTD? And then we see that module 1 is closely linked to the device description and specification and to the information to be supplied by the manufacturer, which are both driven by the risk management as well as by the intended use of the device. Further, we also see, of course, that module 3 is closely linked to the design and manufacturing information, as well as to product verification and validation, which are both driven by the risk management. So that's good to take into account. And then let's go in and check into detail what we need to include in module 1 and module 3. But first of all, let's have a look to module 1 then. So for module 1, we can limit the information on the device. So only if it's, you only need to include some information of the device in case it's necessary for the intended use of the integral medicinal product. So keep that in mind and further limit as much as possible. Further, we already saw, of course, that there might be some device specifics in the labeling, so I didn't repeat that, but that should also be taken into account, of course. Then when we look to module 3, we see that a little bit more device information should be included in module 3. So when we look specifically to module 3.2p, and we start with the P1, we see that we need to include some brief information on the device. But this can be limited to just the type and version of the device and the function. Nothing more, nothing less. Then for the P2 and P3, I prepared the next slide because a little bit more device information should be included in those parts. So we go directly to the P5 and then more specifically the P51, whereby we need to list the specifications which are related to the description, appearance of the device, performance or functionality, and there might be some other critical test parameters. For those critical test parameters, don't look at your technical dossier of your medical device, and you're not going to list every single requirement which you can find, because then you have to list probably quite a lot, because you had to apply certain methods and therefore you may have tested quite a lot. However, those are not all critical. So you have to look at your risk management and you have to determine from that the critical test parameters. So usually this would include still something, because it happens still a lot for drug device combination product, that there will be leakage of the medicinal product. So that might still be a parameter which you should include, or it's in relation to the sterility or to the certain dosing, which can, for instance, also be just your extractable volume. So keep that in mind, that you only list the critical test parameters. Then for the P7, we see that you need to provide a description of the container closure system, which include the sizes, compliance with regulation to cover safety, and specifications to reflect the complexity of the device. Also in this case, if you just have a simple syringe, then you don't list that much specifications here, because that would say that you have a very complex device. Well, it's just a simple syringe. So usually this specification is more in relation to the functionality of the device. So if you need to list any, you listing a more functionality specification for this part. And further, you just limit. Then for the P8, so of course you need to include stability data, but it's also important that you keep in mind that you need to include maybe some functional aspects of the device in your stability study as well, because in the end of the day, you also need to demonstrate that your device will remain stable as well. Then when we look at module 3 to A2, we see that we need to, in case there are materials of human or animal origin used, we need to list can we go just one slide back still? We still need to list in the manufacturing process, we also need to list that from the device. Then when we look at module 3 to R, we finally see this notified body opinion report. So it should be included. And it's over there. It can also be, of course, what we saw, that it may be for class 1, the general safety and performance requirements checklist, or in case available, here you include that a declaration of conformity and or CE certification. In case you don't have that notified body opinion report. Then further, we see some usability studies, and in case those are not applicable, you need to justify why a usability study is not needed. Then we go into detail about the pharmaceutical development. So we see in P22 that the intended use of the medical device and its functionality with suitability for use within the context of the medicinal product should be listed. We see for the manufacturing process development that the medical device is basically out of scope. Only if applicable for your product, the sterility method should be justified. We see for the container closure system, which has a close relation with the P7, which we already see, we have to list some more details. And then specifically, there are some rationales for the materials, and critical and mainly functional parts related to dosing should be listed. Then for the P25, for sterile products, the integrity of the integral medicinal product throughout use and shelf life should be demonstrated. For the P26, we see that we need to list the interaction between the medical device and the medicinal product. So this includes usually your extractable and leachable studies, and then you also need to take into account the in-use condition as well as the transport condition. Then for the manufacturing, we need to list the site responsible for the medical device. And this might be slightly different as what you're used to, because you don't list your contract manufacturing organization, although it may be involved, but you list the site which is responsible. So in case you are relying on a CE certification or declaration of conformity, you list then the legal manufacturer. However, in those other cases, you need to list the one which is usually also on your labeling and which is requesting that notified body opinion. So that might be you as marketing authorization holder. So that's good to take into account. Then for the description of the manufacturing process, you are allowed to just make a reference to the notified body opinion report instead of adding all the details for the device. For the controls of critical steps and intermediates, you also need to define the medical device critical steps, which are also probably in close relation with your risk management documentation, following that ICHQ9 guideline, which you're all well familiar with. Then when we look at the process validation and or evaluation, we see that we need to address the sterilization and filling of the medical device, as well as that you really need to include the assembly of the medical device. So I guess we can conclude from these slides that you have to do a little bit more as just adding the notified body opinion report in the CTD. But further, we've all been talking quite technical and into detail about it, but we haven't seen yet what is then that notified body process. So Tom will take it over and he will explain that into more detail.
Yeah, thanks, Aline, for explaining the technical documentation and also, of course, the common technical documentation, the CTD, what kind of impact does it have? I'm going to speak a little about the notified body process and, of course, how long does it take and how to align it with your marketing authorization application. So let's first go to the notified body process. Before going into this very busy slide, I'm going to say that the source is actually BSI, one of the, well, let's say, most known notified bodies in Europe. And what you will see is that the steps are more or less similar for all notified bodies. However, the timing can differ a little. So the timing mentioned here is the one of BSI. But if you contact or contract another notified body, you can ask for their steps and timing in that respect. So, but let's start left top. And that's basically the pre-review tasks. Well, Aline already addressed a lot of that. I think what is important to stress that you have a choice here. So you can choose a notified body yourself, provided it's indeed allowed to do this, let's say, review the Article 117 and for your device and performs the activities you need. But rather than that, you are able to choose. Of course, then you have to ask if they have indeed room for you, and you're going to ask for a quote. And that's different, of course, from competent authorities. Basically, you ask a quote because you are a customer and the notified body considers you a customer. Then, after signing the quote, you will get a contract. Things will be let down as what kind of expertise is needed for your assessment or for your evaluation. And after closing contract, they will schedule a submission date. If you submit your documentation, first there will be a sort of check if you have everything there, the completeness check. You can compare it a little bit to a technical validation of a medicinal product procedure. After that's been done, it starts by basically the medicinal review conduct. And it means that there are summaries written of the different parts, bits and pieces, and that will be then forwarded to the different technical specialists. That takes around 20 days, at least at BSI, but most notified bodies use more or less comparable timelines. Then the first review starts, the first round of review starts. And then after 20 to 40 working days, you as a customer, as a client, can expect the first round of questions. There will be a clock stop. And in that time, you will work on your answers and submit that to BSI. They will do a second round of reviews and give you questions about that. That takes 20 to 60 days. Again, a clock stop for you as a customer to review it and to come up with answers. And then you have the final third round of review. And that takes 10 to 70 days. You get another clock stop. And thereafter, the notified body will finalize its opinion and make it ready for decision making. And that takes 10 to 80 days, of course, depending also a little bit on the complexity and what's still open. And then you will have your finalized notified body opinion report, which Aline also refers to, which should be then part of your marketing authorization application. So these are roughly the first steps, or the steps in the notified body process. There are a few remarks to make. Well, first of all, clock stops. From the pharmaceutical world, we also know clock stops in centralized procedures and the decentralized procedures. However, in this case, upfront, the notified body will give you a planning, and they will also give you the timing of these clock stops. And there will not be 3 months or 6 months like in the medicinal products. It will be much shorter. Think about just a few weeks. And that's because they stick to their planning. They would like to keep up to their planning. And that's logical because they reserved a number of experts there. And they are otherwise needed for other procedures. So it's important that you try to keep that, let's say, planning. If it's not possible, you can, of course, always speak with the notified body and to see if there are alternative dates possible. The second one is the review round. I think that's important to realize. You have maximum 3 rounds. The required experts are agreed upfront. They will be put down in your contract. And that's, of course, really important because you need those expertise in time. And I said 3 rounds max, and that's true, because after these 3 rounds, the final conclusion is drawn up. It can be positive, or it can also be negative, but you have maximum 3 rounds. Well, what about the planning? So how long does it take? Just a short rundown, I think. For the first step, so looking for a notified body, a suitable notified body, contracted it, negotiating, and then booking a submission slot, that takes at least a month in practice. And then you are fast, because normally you are treated like a customer. So you also look at the commercial side, at the pricing side, which services you would like to have included, because for every hour you pay. Then you need starting building your technical documentation. This is a very frequently asked question to us as a consultant. How quickly can you do this? Can you be very, very fast? Yeah, we can. We can be very fast. We can draw up all required technical documentation in 1 to 2 months. However, in practice, it turns out that a lot of the data we need to write it is not available for different reasons. It still should be supplied by the legal manufacturer, or you still need to generate data. And of course, it also depends on the type of device you have and how complex it is. So in practice, we see it will take 4 to 6 months for sure. Then you go to the next one. You're going to submit for your notified body procedure. We know, and you're also seeing the different kinds of timings in the slide for BSI, that a lot of notified bodies give you very optimistic timelines because they leave out the clock stops and they go for the optimistic scenario. However, in practice, it will take you 4 to 6 months, provided that you answer quickly, so you stick to the clock stop periods the notified body initially told you to, and there is no generation of additional data needed, because if so, you first need to do it and then you need to implement it again, etc. So if we do the math, you will see that such a process will take you at least 9 months. And then you are really, really fast. At average, we see 12 to 14 months. So you have to take that into account when aligning that for your marketing authorization application, so your MAA. So how to do it? The most safest way is, of course, first get the opinion, which takes you in practice 12 to 14 months, and then put that in your marketing authorization application, but then you lose a lot of time. So what we are doing is a lot of in parallel approaches. So trying to run in parallel, working on a notified body opinion and already start with the marketing authorization application. And then we don't put the evaluation into the file, but already the notification and the confirmation of the notified body that they started or that they agreed on a submission date. How that exactly is planned differs a little bit. It differs, of course, also with the client in our case, and also with the authorities. We have seen different kinds of plannings and timings, but that's then possible. It's possible to run things in parallel, and I think that's important. It can save you time. Well, having said that about planning, then I like to address the last topic, and that's actually the take-home messages. So Aline and I came to 5 important points. There are many more, but we selected 5 important ones. And I think the most important one is the first one. Get device expertise on board, because it's a different expertise. It requires different kind of knowledge, different kind of communications, different kind of timelines, etc., etc., etc. So please get device expertise on board if you're going to work on drug-device combinations. Internally, in sourcing, externally, please do so. The second one is start in time. We also spoke about the generation of data. So in practice, you see that there is a lot of data there, but they're more applicable to the medicinal product and not so much to the device. So start in time. If you have a device expertise in time on board, you can also start in time with the generation of data. Third one is notified bodies are not competent authorities. I think it's important to realize you hire them, you contract them. There are commercial institutes, so that's different anyway. You can choose them, that's different too. They use different kinds of standards. They have different kinds of expertise. They use different timelines. So please take that into account. They're really different in the way you handle it. We have quite some experience in working on, let's say, drug-device combinations, and we also did parallel approaches. And we learned that working closely together between medicinal product teams and medical device teams is very, very important. So look at how to work closely together because they're linked. And our last point is actually about lifecycle management. And I know that this Article 17 is only, let's say, applicable from 26th of May 2021. So there's not really much experience yet with this, but we can already tell that you have to revisit it because the common technical document and the device technical documentation are linked now. And they have both different requirements. And to give you an example, if you look at the change control, there is always a regulatory affairs assessment. But now you have a pharma component and you have a medical device component. They follow different routes. A variation in pharma doesn't necessarily mean that you do need to do a change to your technical documentation. But for that, you need an expert to review it and to come to that conclusion. Another example is, of course, complaints. You can have complaints about your pharma part, but you can also have complaint about your device part. That follows a different route and needs a different kind of expertise. And also think about your pharmacovigilance. You have pharmacovigilance for the, let's say, pharma part, but you also have a vigilance and safety part to address for your medical device part, which also follows a different kind of setup and a different kind of rules. So, having said that, I'm going to close our presentation. Thank you very much for your attention in that sense. And if you would like to have more information, please feel free to contact us. The details are here. And we have a lot of PLG colleagues as well who can also do amazing jobs for you with regards to medical device. So thank you for your attention. And I would like to open up the floor for, let's say, questions.
Thank you so much, Tom and Elaine. So much information to absorb. And we do get actually several questions lined up. So let's crack the first one. And I think it's for you, Elaine. So the audience says, could you let us know which information in module 3 we should provide for the device?
Yes, well, I think we have discussed that a bit later than that the question was raised in quite some detail. So as you can see, that it was a little bit more than just providing that notified body opinion. In case there is something unclear, because you can watch the webinar back, so you can also see in close detail what was mentioned on the slide. But in case there's still some unclarity, then I guess it would be easiest just to contact me personal, and then I can help out with that question. Instead of that, we're going to repeat all those slides which were on module 3.
Yeah, of course. So just so you know that I will share the recorded webinar with all of you guys if it's necessary. So our second question is, are there any differences between the information that we should provide in module 3 if we have an integral drug device combination or a referenced product?
Yes, there are differences, definitely. So what we discussed today was only the integral drug device combination product. So that's important to keeping into mind. So we didn't discuss the reference product. And then also for the reference products, there are some differences, because if you make a reference to just a group of devices which can be applied, then you have to include almost nothing into your CTD. However, in case you refer to a specific product, reference product, then you have to include some details into module 3. It's a little less as the integral drug device combination product. I think it's quite complicated to tell the story just spot on. So I think that this person should contact me, because I see it's anonymous. But please reach out to me, because I can share and answer your question via email, or maybe we can even set up a call to discuss it into more detail. But I think it would take quite some time to explain all the differences.
Okay, cool. So let's get to the third one. Mr. Corstens or Miss Corstens asking, device part evaluated by NB. What are the limiting timelines when combining a generic drug in and a device, notified body or CBG/EMA?
Shall I take this, Aline? Because probably it's a little bit more on my field. Well, here, thanks for the question. I think it depends how you formulate generic. If it's a generic drug device combination, I think probably you will be quicker than the old situation. So the old situation is before Article 117. If you're speaking about, I have a generic drug, and I would like to put that in a medical device, and that's a new drug-device combination, I think it will help you. And what's basically then the limiting time factor? I would say still the CBG EMA side, because the notified body, if you plan it cleverly and you have everything arranged, you can do it in such a way that it will not conflict too much with your timelines. And basically the CBG might take a little bit longer in a complete review. So if you would ask me, I would say 117 provides us a better and clear way of handling a device compared to the old situation. And the time, because you can do things in parallel, I think the limiting timelines will be still the CBG EMA.
Okay, so the last question so far comes from our same audience, Mr. Korstens. Is a declaration of conformity from an existing legacy device possible to avoid a NB opinion for the device?
Yeah, that's a nice question, Geert. And it's also a difficult question to answer. So what we see for new applications is because it's a new application for the drug device, and therefore you have to meet the requirements of the medicinal product regulation. So that's initially stated. So that would mean that you have to follow the medical device regulation. However, we are aware, of course, that in the medical device industry, it might not yet be updated to the medical device regulation, because we have all these extension transition timelines which you can make use of. It's also not always a decision of you as a legal manufacturer that you want to use it. It can also be that you're kind of forced, that you have to make use of it because the notified body is way too slow to assess your new application, maybe. So I think that if you don't want any questions or difficult questions, especially from when you're submitting to the EMA or to a national competent authority, it should be a declaration of conformity which is in line with the medical device regulation. However, if it's really not possible and it's not your fault, so you did do some assessment, because that's predominantly where the EMA and the national competent authorities are focused on, whether you took into account those additional requirements. So if you somehow can still demonstrate that it's not your fault and it's just because of your notified body, or maybe you can arrange a kind of statement, and that you have been meeting already those additional requirements, most likely, then it should be possible, probably one way or the other way. But you need to have a good story.
Okay, thank you all. So if you have more questions, don't hesitate to contact us. On the screen, you can find our contact way. I'm sure that would be lovely to serve you. And thank you all again for joining us. And I hope you all enjoyed this webinar, and looking forward to having you all again to our next webinar. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.